I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Anthony T.J. Mangoni, who is the District Response Advisory Team Supervisor for the 9th Coast Guard District. TJ's bio is about this thick, so I'm going to try to make it short. He's a native of Erie, PA, graduated from the U.S. Coast Guard Training Center, Cape May in 1991, Marine Science Technician Advanced Training in 1993, and Senior Enlisted Academy in 2012. He has served as a command duty officer at the National Response Center in Washington, duty petty officer with the 9th District Response Advisory Team in Cleveland. His personal awards include the Coast Guard Commander's Award for Civilian Service, Global War on Terrorism Medal, Coast Guard Achievement Medal with Operational Distinguishing Devices, and numerous other Coast Guard and personal awards. And before I ask TJ to come up, I also want to recognize his colleague, Dave Mergenthaler. Dave, maybe you could stand up and wave. Dave is the emergency manager, and where we know Dave is when we have our semi-annual meetings to talk about oil spills and emergencies in the river. Dave runs these meetings, so he's a very important person to all of us up here, and we all work closely with him. So Dave, thank you for coming up, and where's TJ? There you go.
All right, well, thank you. I have to remind myself to talk directly into this thing. So I want to just thank the group, Save the River, for inviting us up. This is something that we view as very, very important. I work in Cleveland, Ohio. I work for the Admiral, the commander of the 9th District. And so my area of responsibility that I support is from Messina, New York, all the way to the Red River, the line between North Dakota and Minnesota. We have 1,500 miles of international border, 6,300 miles of shoreline that we protect. So this is the gateway to all of that, this river. So it's a very, very important piece of what we support. So, and Save the River is very important to this region. So we recognize this. So Save the River, I want to thank again. You guys are a voice that the Coast Guard listens to. You talk about resources and requirements and needs for environmental response on the river, which is one of our primary missions. Disruptions of the river, which is another mission, waterways management. Your voice is important to us. And we could be, and we are, an advocate for your voice within that federal response system. Like John said, Dave Mergenthaler is from Sector Buffalo. He works for the captain of the port out of Buffalo. His area of responsibility is from Messina, New York to Vermilion, Ohio, right there in the middle of Ohio. The captain is in charge. He's the Federal On-Scene Coordinator for Environmental Response, captain of the port, Maritime Security Coordinator. He wears multiple hats. So I'm a quote person. So when I was coming up here, I'm thinking, okay, what's an appropriate quote for Save the River? It's not a comedy movie. If you guys can guess who it is, Dave will buy you lunch. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. Helen Keller, right? So that's what I think of when I think of Save the River. So all right, I'm going to get right into this presentation here. So you see a vessel on fire there. I'm going to talk about 3 vessel fires. 3 total constructive losses, hundreds of million dollars in damage, and a lot of people responded to these things. So I have another quote to sort of set the tone for this, and why the 9th District, my team, we decided based on the things we learned from these fires Marine firefighting, I think, in little pockets around the Great Lakes was very mature. Not the rule, the exception to the rule. So these eye-opening events really got us thinking that we really need to have a group to get together with local fire chiefs. Because you think about the Great Lakes, you go from Chicago, right, to Clayton. There's a resource difference, right? There's a personnel number difference. So how do we kind of get smart on how we operate in all these different, jurisdictions and environments? So another quote, smart people learn from everything and everyone. Average people from their experiences. Stupid people already have all the answers. So Socrates, right? Anyway. So that's the reason we have a Marine Firefighting Task Force, is to build a peer-to-peer group that the regulators, the Coast Guard, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, other federal agencies, along with local fire chiefs, salvage companies, industry, shipyards, we all get together and we talk. So we'll go through this presentation, and the complexity of something like this, and I responded personally in command role to every one of these fires, and it was shocking and how complex these things get very, very quickly, and how the focus on what you're doing changes rapidly. So responding to the vessel fire, again, very, very complex. So the development of this task force, we've thought very critical, and I tell you the response has been overwhelming. A lot of folks felt the same way, that we really needed to fill a gap. And so the task force really is to answer some questions for us as responders, and that is, how do we determine what the scope of this problem is? If you roll up on a fire, right, and the ship is engulfed, well, how do you kind of size it up and understand exactly what you're dealing with? What can be the impact of the problem? I know we've talked about PFAS and we've talked about things. Firefighting foam, fire departments use it. So we have taken steps into how to address that and how do we mitigate any effects of that. So what are the resources available to solve the problem? We just talked about Chicago to Clayton, the difference in resources, right? There's 2 fireboats in Chicago that cost millions each, right? So the resources are different in different parts of the area, our area of responsibility. And the dynamic nature of an event like this. You have a lot of moving parts. And then what are the solutions? Right? You have solutions that are planned. We have salvage marine firefighting plans in our area contingency plans. So our area contingency plans and the vessel response plans are developed for one reason, and that is to mitigate the substantial threat to the environment, period. All of our efforts are to that end. The captain in Buffalo would determine if this incident constitutes a substantial threat. A fire, what do you think? No brainer, right? Yeah, absolutely. So we activate vessel response plans. We activate area contingency plans, salvage marine firefighting plans. So we have solutions that we've planned out in our head. How many do you think we use on game day? None, right? We're running, we're reacting. And so there's all these unplanned solutions that are being developed. This task force really, in a scenario-based way, gets these fire chiefs to start thinking about that, along with us, because the Coast Guard comes with authority and funding and power to compel things to occur from maybe a company or jurisdiction. So that's what we do. And then what are the best ways of implementing these solutions? That's part of this thing. And how do we measure what victory looks like at the end of the day, right? None of these cases look like victory, but there were victories here, right? And we learned a lot. And so we'll get right into it. So the motor vessel St. Clair, a 762-foot Great Lakes Laker, self-unloading vessel, right? Moored up in what we call winter layup. So I'll just define winter layup because you're going to probably see that term. It's an inactive status where the vessel maintains a required certificate of inspection and an active vessel response plan. They're just having work done on them over the winter, right? They're getting ready for the next season. So, you know, the seasonality of the Great Lakes really lends itself to these vessels getting into layup, into a shipyard, getting fixed up, getting ready. So that's what happens in the winter. They're moving come breakout season in the spring. So she was tied up. She caught fire. So we came in. That fire burned for 8 days internal to that vessel. 75% of the vessel was engulfed when we rolled up on it. So huge, huge problem. Her last cargo was coal. Coal dust is an explosive hazard. So a lot of safety issues, right? So I was initial safety officer, and I didn't want to be, I'll tell you that. So Unified Command, Toledo Fire Department, Oregon, Ohio Fire Department, the United States Coast Guard, and the company that owns the ship. So we had a lot of decisions to make right away. So we activated the vessel response plan. Vessel response plan is used to mitigate the substantial threat. The threat of this vessel was 69,000 gallons of bunker oil aboard. So we were pumping water on this thing because internal to the vessel, how many are familiar with Lakers and the ships and how they self-unload, and what is that stuff that the belts are made of? Rubber. If that catches fire, it's like a tire fire, right? So very, very difficult. So we pumped about, I don't know, 1 million gallons on this thing. We had 180,000 gallons of contaminated water, and this is where we talk about PFOS, PFOA, AFFF. That foam put that fire, you know, that is the thing that can control that fire. We contained it to the vessel. We had to pump the vessel off. She was listing very hard to starboard. Tied to her was another Laker that had about 50,000 gallons of fuel aboard. The high heat alarm on the Laker next to her was over 700 degrees. So 2 700, 800-foot vessels at risk. One, a potential explosive hazard. So you can see some of our urgency. So what ended up happening, we were able to get a dewatering permit for parts of the vessel where foam did not go. We dewatered. Emergency Ohio EPA granted us that ability. We saved the water that we had contaminated with oil, burnt rubber, AFFF foam. We pumped off into temporary storage tanks. We had 18 of them at a time lined up on the pier, manifolds in between, and we were pumping that contaminated water into those tanks, and we had a company that would categorize the waste and then dispose of it. Complex, right? Very, very complex. And complex to the point where we had to make these decisions, you know, it was the middle of winter. We were down there in shorts and t-shirts because it was so hot, right? It was like the sun, right? So that's some of the complexity that we're dealing with. So the vessel that was tied up right next to her was the Great Republic, if anyone's familiar with Great Lakers. And again, she had 45,000 gallons of fuel aboard. So a big deal. This was our first fire that really got us going, oh man, we really, really need to be on top of this, right? So then we'll go to the next slide, please. The next fire. Actually, one of the young men in a blue uniform probably took this picture here on the bottom right. That is from a Coast Guard. That is infrared radar. That is how hot that ship was burning. This is the motor vessel Tecumseh. Canadian flagged, underway, downbound the Detroit River. Very similar situation as the St. Lawrence River. Instantly bilateral issues, instantly, you know, water issues, all of these things that occur, they're very, very similar here. So the Tecumseh caught fire. We finally got her to drop her anchors just inside Canadian waters. Our mission focus that moment was the 16 people on board. Search and rescue was our primary mission right there. So we decided that they were safe aboard, forward, and then we had the company, we had firefighters, and the company cut their anchor lines. So anybody understand, so the Coast Guard has this process called place of refuge. The conversation is, where can we take a ship that is in trouble, whether it be maybe due to weather, maybe due to whatever. Fire is one of those things. So who wants this? Right? Nobody. Well, thankfully, our Canadian partners, the Port of Windsor, said, we'll clear part of the terminal, bring her in. We have to. So we brought her in. This thing burned inside that hot for 2 straight days before we were able to do something. So this happened on the 15th, let's see, the 15th of February in 2019. So this case here, this was a Canadian vessel in Canadian waters, but we required them, because the fire started on the US side, to activate their United States Vessel Response Plan. So they hired their contractors. So we have treaties with Canada that really makes this easy. They're great partners to us, and we are great partners to them. So we were able to get the salvage company and the salvage Marine Firefighting Team, US companies. So that 8-person firefighting team came out of New Orleans, Louisiana. They were there that night at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. First entry was at 0100. Because it didn't matter if it was dark or not, right? You're going into a hot thing, so there's no visibility in there anyway. So, canola grain, another explosion. This is a floating bomb floating down the river, right? So, what the Canadians did, the Canadian Fire Department in Windsor, so the conversation, we were on the conference calls, the port director, great guy, said, bring her in, we cleared part of the terminal. The fire chief's like, what'd you say? You're bringing what in here, right? There it is, like, it's like, holy, what does that size up look like, right? So, brought the vessel in, and all Windsor Fire Department could do was cool the hull. They had knew nothing else. So this is another reason this task force is so important. That Salvage Marine Firefighting Team that is identified in the Vessel Response Plan came up from New Orleans, made entry, was able to isolate and start putting out hot spots. So this thing started in the port engine, and had it gotten to the belt system, into the tunnels, that canola dust probably would have exploded. It was a very, very good and we were very, very lucky. They tried their CO2 system on board. It didn't work. This thermal imaging picture here just is so telling, right? You really can't tell she's on fire in the other pictures. You take a look at that thing, it's bright white. So, did not evacuate, so I lost my train of thought there. So the Windsor Fire Department, they had a shelter in place for 1 mile around this vessel. So they did not evacuate, they made people shelter in place. So it was a big deal, and very quick decisions to bring it into that. We couldn't wait until we got to Toledo. The thing was burning. So that was the answer. And those are hard decisions to make if you're, a person responsible for a municipality and a port. That's a tough decision to say, yeah, bring that burning ship in here that could explode, right? So, good on them. All right, next slide. Roger Blau fire. This is the last big fire we had. This was February 1st, 2021. She's 833 feet long. So she was at Frincatieri Shipbuilding Company in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. Rafted off amongst several vessels. The fire started in aft section of the vessel. Sturgeon Bay Fire Department came aboard, and you can see the smoke coming out of some of the hatches. Thick black smoke. What did that indicate to us, right? One of the belts is on fire. It's huge rubber particles they were reporting when they went aboard. So there is a rear boom section, rear on the vessel that was literally buckling and changing shape due to the heat of the fire. They cut holes in the stern on both sides of the vessel, and that's the other decision to make. What don't you want to add to a fire? Oxygen, but what don't you want it to do? Explode. So that, you have to make decisions there. Another total constructive loss, $120 million at least, this vessel. So the unloading belts were unaffected, but there's some of the aft belts burned. 3 belt fires at once. And the motor vessel James Barker, for those Laker fans, and the motor vessel American Mariner, on either side, less than 100 feet away, lashed together. So we had preparations with tugboats to cut lines and start pulling vessels out, right? We could not remove the plow from the mooring because they couldn't fight the fire then. So another, like what the heck kind of decision, right? So contributing factor to this fire was a temporary heating source. What does that say? Space heater, not allowed for shipboard use. So on these vessels, when they go into layup, they have basically ship tender or a watchman or watch person aboard. And they're not qualified crew in most cases because you can't afford qualified crew, right? So another thing that we have changed through what we call marine safety information bulletins. So I have a picture of one up here. We're working on an updated one for this year. But basically, as we get into this, we'll explain exactly what that means. All right, next slide. All right, the why. This is why we're doing this. I have to shift papers here real quick. And if you have questions on anything, ask, just ask. And if I don't have the answer, Dave, you were interviewed, he's writing them down. I will get an answer for you. All right. So we just went through these fires, so you see our problem statement, right? Very, very complex problems. So building a peer-to-peer network to provide local incident commanders, whether they be Coast Guard, Fire Department, all together, access to the best information possible. What were lessons learned in other areas of the country, or other areas of the Great Lakes? So when the Tecumseh caught on fire, I brought the incident commander from, the St. Clair fire with me, right? So we worked it together again. So anyway, understand local and state and federal authorities. What we found in some of the smaller areas of the Great Lakes, there wasn't a really great understanding of what the Coast Guard can do in these situations, what authorities we have to, like I said, compel things to occur, or if we activate a vessel response plan and the response isn't going the way it should, we are funded to take it over and make sure it goes the way it should. And again, groups like this, we're advocates for your thoughts and your concerns, right? So we want local incident commanders' understanding of tactical considerations, things like this. So the first seminar we did was a huge hit, and they were getting into a lot of things. And I have a list of a few after-action items that we've addressed for this year's workshop. So, all right, next slide. There's a lot of words on these slides. I don't want to go through it here. So this is the charter, right? So we created a charter. This is an official thing now. We have a charter. So, like I said, I work on a district response team. We are here to support our local incident command sector commands with resources, technical expertise. If it's something is more demanding than routine to one of our units, we come in and support them and help them work through it. So we work under the principle of effective presence. The right resource, the right capability, at the right place at the right time, and we throw in there for all of you taxpayers there at a reasonable cost. We always keep that in our mind. So this charter here, I mean, you can't read the little words, but at the bottom there, it says this is for local fire chiefs, for Coast Guard officers, Coast Guard enlisted, whatever, all the lists. Volunteer organizations is added to this. It's in there. So this group of people values what the volunteer organizations bring to the table as well. So next slide. All right, some of the current initiatives, and again, we're getting we've probably talked about these. I'm not very good at following the slides very well, but I'll do my best. So shoreside firefighting considerations. So how we got our head around this marine firefighting thing was, okay, there are 6 cities in the Great Lakes that lay up multiple vessels during winter periods. 2 of these major fires were during maintenance periods, inactive status. So that is something, because if you think about a marine fire and you're starting to think about floating down the river or in a port, so we took this little chunk that lends itself to help all the other problems. So shoreside firefighting, the fire departments really have to understand what a fire is, right? What the ships are. So we did a Marine Safety Information Bulletin requiring our ship inspectors to engage their fire departments for a walkthrough with the ship plans, talk about terminology in all of these layup cities. If there are vessels there in an inactive status, that fire department's walking through them with the Coast Guard. That was one of the big things that came out of these fires. We have a winter layup inactive status survey where we'll go through and we'll say, okay, do you have a caretaker aboard? What's the phone number of the caretaker? Do you have, are you welding? Are you doing hot work? So all these surveys lend themselves for the Coast Guard and the fire department to understand what kind of stuff's being done on that vessel. So if you get a call, you can anticipate maybe, right? Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, the infamous site of the Roger Blau fire was our last big fire. So the fire chief there, who is a big proponent of this, he emails me every day. We had a command seminar there where we brought fire departments in, we brought the shipyard in to kind of talk about things. And, we decided to talk about, okay, winter layup cities. Frincateri Shipyard in Sturgeon Bay has fire hydrants. They're state-of-the-art. There are 6 vessels tied up in Ashtabula, Ohio at an old coal dock. There's no access to water. So how do we fix that, right? So these are some of the things that we're talking about in this thing. So we have a workshop coming up, which the later slide will say, in Erie, Pennsylvania, the week after Easter this year. And that workshop, and we're going to build on some of the things that we learned. Some of the takeaways from the seminar were coordinate joint federal and state casualty investigations. Figure out why these things are happening. Explore more surveys, better surveys. What do we need, improve this thing every year. Let's see, what was a good one? All right, coordination between Coast Guard command centers and fire dispatch centers. So if you talk to a fire dispatch center, they're going to get a 911 call, there's a big ship on fire, right? The Coast Guard command center, they're going to know the name of the vessel, what fuel's on board that vessel, how big the vessel is, where all of these different things, the fire department has no idea. So we learned that the fire department's probably getting better information from what's going on. The Coast Guard's getting better data on what's the vessel and the owner and who's coming there and all that stuff. So we need to be better at the fire dispatch center and the Coast Guard asking the same questions and sharing critical information. So we've developed a couple different forms. And the other thing is our situation reports, communicating better to our port partners. Because I will tell you, we probably were not very good communicators in the beginnings of these things, and we could do better at that. So that's it. Next slide. All right, just some notes on what that means on shore firefighting considerations, designation of firefighting piers, for example, in the port, familiarization and stability for the fire department to get them walking through the vessel. You know, you get a fire team on a vessel and you enter and you walk down into the tunnel. They're thinking, holy moly, we don't have enough hose to get down here, right? So their eyes are open to really what it means, right? So strategy, tactics, communication. Fire attack with foam, big conversation piece for us. Fire attack with water and dewatering. We're trying to, in these layup cities, we're trying to answer those problems, understand where we can get temporary storage devices, things that we do not let AFFF water, if at any cost, I mean, hey, there may be a time where the thing sinks, I don't know, but we're going to do our very, very best to keep it out of the water. And that was the case with the motor vessel St. Clair. That was not a very popular decision to the folks, the insurance company and the owner of the company, that no, you need to dispose of that. You need to get tanks. You can't put that over the side. You can put this dirty water over the side that's not contaminated with AFFF foam, but you cannot put your AFFF over the side. So, anyway, yes, ma'am. Oh, 5 minutes? Oh yeah, next slide. All right, here's the MSIB, Marine Safety Information Bulletin, that we required the fire chiefs. Next slide. And here's the survey. It's a regulatory requirement. We're just improving really what it looks like on the ground. And we're requiring a pre-fire plan that the fire chiefs can have in a mailbox at the bottom of the gangway of the vessel. Pull it open, it's right there, right? Next slide. All right, that was the command seminar. We talked about that. Next slide. All right. This is where we become like the Coast Guard can help. So we have these things called preparedness for response exercises. They're funded, they're Open 90 required. Salvage Marine Firefighting is part of that plan. So we are developing baseline objectives that we can apply to all of our exercises in this requirement that are vessel-based. So we can have a breakout room and get the fire companies there that can just talk about the scenario, have a scenario-based conversation whenever we do these exercises. So that's what we're trying to do. Next slide. All right, and these can, well, we're having an exercise up here this summer, maritime disruption, grounded vessel. Let's have a breakout, right? You know, Clayton Fire Department for the Pacific Huron was gracious to us, let us use their fire department there as a command post. I was here for that one. It was only minus 40 degrees ambient air temperature. It was beautiful. Anyway, so we want to bring one up here. We want to bring a scenario up here where we have a breakout and we discuss this issue, right? Next slide. And the way forward. And I have a couple notes I just want to make a point of, and then I will get out of your hair. All right. Part of my job is I am the alternate co-chair for Regional Response Team, which under the National Contingency Plan is state and federal regional partners, right? Issues are important. I can bring those issues. Like, I don't know the chemical effects of PFOS, PFOA. I know I'm just not going to try it. I'm trying not to let it in the water, right? But we have people for that, right? USEPA is the co-chair along with another Coast Guard person. And I'm the alternate. So that group of folks, we will try to get up to this exercise. I also am the alternate co-chair for the Joint Response Team with the Canadians under the Joint Marine Contingency Plan. The other thing, we've talked about having a conversation with Environment Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and USEPA. So I just wanted to say that. And I want to put a plug in for the folks in blue there. These folks live, work, raise their families on this river, and they're a great resource for all of you. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. Are there any questions for TJ or Dave while we have them here?
Yes, sir.
TJ, a couple of things. One, thank you
last 46 years, I've been working on the seaway system as a pilot, working hand in hand with my district. I have great respect for these people in my district. And I have seen an improvement in the response to fire casualties. And I see an improvement by ships themselves, of shoreside staff, and it's been very encouraging. And during the course of my career, I've had to go to firefighting school periodically, as you know, down in Baltimore, New Jersey, down in Maryland. And it's been the worst part of my career. I hate going in to those controlled burns inside the vessel. I can't use it other than you do it day in, day in, and day out. And how you do it, I'd be burned out soon on the job. Question for you. The CO2 system on the Tecumseh? CO2 system on the Tecumseh, you said it didn't work.
That's because it just broke down?
No,
It wasn't capable of handling the extreme.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, I think it was not capable of. I think the fire was burning so hot and it spread, where the CO2 system was just ineffective, and we really needed to get a trained team in to hit those hot spots with water.
Yeah, thanks very much. Keep up the good work.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chief Judge.